Hello everyone. I will share real stories that I know and I'm sure you will like them.
The evening had been colder than I expected. The kind of chill that seeped through fabric, lingering on skin long after you'd stepped inside. The warmth of the house should have been immediate, but it wasn't. Not yet. The cold still clung to me, wrapping around my shoulders, trailing down my spine like an invisible whisper. Here, let me. His voice came from behind me, deep and smooth, familiar in a way that sent an unexpected warmth through my chest. I turned slightly, watching as he reached for my coat. My husband's friend. Someone who had always been around, always there in the background of our lives. Steady, dependable, safe, or at least I had always assumed. He tugged at the collar of my coat, his fingers brushing the back of my neck as he slid it off my shoulders. The touch was fleeting, barely there, but it was enough. Enough to send a ripple down my arms, enough to make me hyper-aware of every inch of space between us. I swallowed, forcing a small smile. Thanks. It was freezing out there. He chuckled, low and knowing, his breath warm against my ear as he leaned in slightly. Yeah, I could tell. The way he said it, it wasn't casual. There was something else beneath it, something deliberate, something that made the air between us shift. His hands didn't move away immediately. Instead, they lingered just below my shoulders, his thumbs barely skimming the fabric of my dress. A moment stretched between us, drawn tight like a wire, humming with something unspoken. I should have stepped forward. Should have turned away. But I didn't. Instead, I held still, feeling the weight of his hands, the heat of them through the fabric, the hesitation that wasn't really hesitation at all. You're warm now, he murmured, voice lower this time. I let out a slow breath, the words catching somewhere in my throat. Yeah, I guess I am. He exhaled too, a quiet sound, almost like he was amused. Or pleased. The silence between us wasn't empty. It was thick, charged, the kind of silence that wasn't meant to last. His hands, still at my sides, flexed slightly, as if he were testing something, as if he were waiting to see if I would move, if I would step away. But I didn't. Instead, I felt the slow press of his fingertips, the way they skimmed over the fabric, tracing the faintest path down the curve of my arms. It was barely a touch, so light it could have been imagined, but it wasn't. I felt it, and he knew I did. You okay? He asked, voice softer now, but still edged with something deeper. I nodded, though my pulse betrayed me. Yeah. He let his fingers drift just a little lower, down to my elbows, lingering there. You don't seem sure. I exhaled, closing my eyes for a second, grounding myself. This was Nick, my husband's friend. The man who had been in our lives for years. The man I never thought twice about. And yet, right now, with the air thick and unsteady between us, with his fingers barely grazing my skin, everything felt different. I should. My voice faltered as his hands shifted slightly, his grip firmer now, steady but not demanding. Just enough to keep me exactly where I was. I should go check on. He's not home yet, he said, reading my mind. Still out with the guys. I swallowed hard, nodding. Right. He studied me for a moment, his head tilting slightly. You always get this quiet when someone touches you? I let out a nervous laugh, shaking my head. No, Just what? The words hung in the air, waiting. I didn't have an answer. Or maybe I did, but I wasn't ready to say it. His fingers flexed once more, then finally, slowly, he pulled away. The loss of warmth was immediate, the space between us suddenly too vast. But the weight of his gaze remained, anchoring me in place. You should warm up, he murmured, stepping back just enough to put distance between us. Wouldn't want you catching cold. His voice was teasing, but there was something else underneath it, something quiet and restrained. He reached for my coat where he had set it on the chair, draping it neatly over the back as if to give me the option of leaving the moment behind. As if to pretend it had never happened. But it had. And as he turned toward the door, his fingers brushing the doorknob, I realized something with startling clarity. I didn't want him to go. I stood there, frozen in place, long after he had turned toward the door. The warmth of his hands still lingered against my arms, a phantom sensation that refused to fade. I could hear my own breath, uneven and shallow, the only sound in the quiet room. He hesitated at the door, his fingers resting lightly against the knob. He didn't turn it, didn't make any move to leave just yet. Instead, he exhaled, low and quiet, as if he were considering something, measuring the weight of the moment. "You good?" he asked, his voice softer this time. I blinked as if coming back to myself. "Yeah, fine." He turned slightly, glancing over his shoulder. "You sure?" I wasn't. Not really. My pulse was still a steady hum beneath my skin, the tension in the air refusing to dissipate. I swallowed hard, nodding anyway. "Yeah, I didn't expect." "Me neither." He cut me off, a quiet chuckle in his voice, though there was something else there, something unreadable. The air between us stretched tight, filled with something neither of us acknowledged, but both of us felt. I knew I should break it, should say something lighthearted, should step away before this turned into something I couldn't explain. But I didn't. Instead, he shifted, turning fully to face me again, his expression unreadable. "Can I ask you something?" I hesitated. "Sure. Do you ever think about it?" His voice was measured, careful. A slow heat spread through my chest, pooling low in my stomach. I knew what he was asking. There was no need to clarify. I could have lied. I could have laughed it off, given him some easy answer that would pull us both back to safe ground. But my lips parted, and before I could stop myself, I answered honestly. "Sometimes." The single word settled between us, heavier than it should have been. His jaw tensed slightly, his fingers tightening around the edge of the doorframe. "Yeah," he murmured. "Me too." Silence stretched, thick and weighted. It wasn't uncomfortable. It was something else entirely, something charged, something we weren't supposed to be feeling, but couldn't seem to ignore. His gaze flickered down briefly, as if debating something, as if considering a step neither of us had prepared for. My breath caught, but I didn't move away. I didn't stop him. Then, just as quickly as the moment had settled over us, he exhaled sharply and took a step back. The space between us grew wider, but the tension remained. "I should go," he said, voice rougher now, as if it took effort to say the words. I nodded slowly. "Yeah, probably." Neither of us moved. He ran a hand through his hair, exhaling again before finally reaching for the door. This time, he turned the knob, pulling it open. "Good night," he murmured, his voice softer now. "Good night," I echoed, my voice barely above a whisper. And then he was gone. I stood there for a long time after he left, my heart still racing, my mind replaying every second of what had just happened. Nothing had happened, not really. No lines had been crossed. No words had been spoken that couldn't be explained away. And yet, I knew. This wasn't over. Not even close.